Had I just asked the right questions, I would have navigated my whole career so differently. So yeah, I definitely think like if it feels scary, I your body already doesn't want to do it. So how could I have reframed all these experiences as not scary, but actually, something positive to explore? So yeah, that was kind of how it manifested in my adulthood, is where I conformed and minimized most of my life.
Conformed and minimized. Wow. I think that's a really succinct summary of a lot of women's experiences in particular. And I do really want to emphasize that, because you even shared, Jen, earlier about how your stepdad was with your mom and that confidence. It is, this is why I believe in the lenses and the different layers of identity, right? There's being racialized compared to being white. And then there's also being racialized and a woman, or gender diverse and non-binary, compared to being a male who's racialized. And there's how women are viewed and treated, including in different cultures, including in Asian cultures, including in some African cultures that I'm aware of. Yeah, it's an additional layer of marginalization and oppression. And I'm thinking about this comment around being treated as a child or not being allowed to challenge people's voices in the household. How are we supposed to learn to advocate for ourselves if in our own homes growing up, we're told, just do what I say because I'm the boss of the household, or you don't know any better, I'm the one who knows, right? That expert voice that you mentioned, Jen, I think in your family dynamic as well. One of my clients has actually said, because she's in a new level of leadership, and she made this analogy to being the kid at the adult table. And I remember those days when we would have bigger family dinners or family friends dinners. There's the kids table, there was the adults table. And yeah, that in between stage of you're still a kid, or you'll always be a kid in the adult's eyes, but now you're sitting at the adult table because now you're 35 instead of 5, something like that. And so it can also translate to being treated that way in the workplace. I kind of think from my HR perspective, Jen, that you shouldn't have had to ask or tell people that I'm a new manager and I need some help. They should have just offered that to you, right? So There's also that.
There's also that. And I love what you're saying. And Marathana, thank you for sharing. And so nice to know that there's shared experiences here in terms of the cultural and heritage and ancestry messaging that our parents received growing up. But yeah, there is this terminology, and it still resonates today for a lot of Asians, is the being an adult child. Even how do we, because we're adults, still can have these types of conversations with our parents in a very healthy way to get past all of those things that we don't want to build resentment for our parents, for example, and how can they apologize in a way that's authentic without getting defensive? Because even if I bring certain things that didn't feel pleasant growing up with my mom, she'll get very defensive about it. Mm-hmm. So how do we communicate with our closest people in our lives, the people we love the most, that we're actually adults and we can make decisions, we are allowed to fail, and there's so much learning in failure. And that's something that's still hard to do. Even for me as an adult, having these conversations with my parents, it's so fascinating how ingrained some of our old beliefs stick with us in adulthood. And I think it's, and I'm generalizing because my sister, who grew up in the same household, doesn't have a lot of this experience. And it might just be more heavily burdened upon first generation children of immigrant parents, because we're in that intersection of Asian or heritage and our new culture here in the country that we live in. So we're kind of like in between. And so we might want to respect and value our Asian culture and heritage and what comes with it. But then we also want to be able to embody and take on some of the beliefs that we've captured being here, for me, being an American. So it is kind of like we're torn with our identities. And so it can be tough to be an adult, but still, how do we show respect and not offend our parents?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Challenge. That's a challenge.
Really good. Yeah. And I think that's one that many people face. And this is also why I focus on diaspora a lot, because that internal conflict or that familial conflict between how your parents were raised and what seems to be culture from whatever home nation that you came from versus where you are now, if you're living in Europe or North America and faced with like a white supremacy culture and all the values that comes with, it can feel very conflicting. And that, internal conflict as well as external, very real conflict, right? And one of the ways that I think my family tried to manage it and how I learned to manage it was through control, which works well in a business setting when it's all about project management and planning and budgeting and control. And you'll never be surprised if you anticipate all the things that could go wrong. And if you think something's going to go wrong, you get insurance, you protect your liability, you do this, you do that. And that really contributed, or maybe is the root of my perfectionism, my performance, and how I desperately believed, because that seemed to be what I was seeing, that my value comes from my performance. And so if I don't perform, then I might get fired, I won't be respected at work. And it was desperately important to be respected, which also to me was equivalent of acceptance. I've separated those things now. And so all these, that's not comfortable, right? I don't know if any of you have experienced that, or maybe a good reflection question for all of you who's listening is, how do you think you've learned to cope and deal with the inherent fears, the inherent risks that you were taught by your family or by your influencers that exist for you in the world and in your workplace? And more importantly, is that something that's working for you? And it could totally be working for you. It's not that we have to throw everything out. What's working for you and what's not? And for the things that are not working for you, maybe what's behind that. That's why we're having these conversations. And how might you want to be different? And then therefore, how could you change? Because I know when Jen and I were talking, there were definitely things that we wanted to change, and we didn't want our past to dictate our future. So maybe that's a good time now, Jen, to talk about that. How are you seeing changes in yourself, and what do you want to be different in the future?
Yes. So for me, what I mentioned in the beginning about just making 2024 my intention to be more bold, that the self-reflection is so helpful to know, how do my decisions or actions or choices today get informed? And what can happen is, if along my journey in life, there's been an impression that risk-taking is not possible, or I'm not allowed to do it, or it looks too risky to do anything different than what you know. Of course, our natural human reaction is to have reservations and resistance. And I've probably come up with a lot of excuses in the past adulthood where I said to myself, well, you know what, I'm okay not being a risk taker. I'm comfortable where I am. There's no need for me to take risk. And when we come up with those excuses, it's really just maybe protecting ourselves from doing what we really want to do. So why deny or prevent yourself, or not give yourself permission to do what you want to do? And if inside of you is to be more of a risk taker, then what needs to get out of the way for you to be able to give yourself that permission to risk take? So for my future, what I want to do is not lament too much on the past. I think it's good to recognize, for me, where my thoughts about risk taking or not risk taking has come from. But I really want to look forward. I have so much gratitude for the life I've built for myself today. And with that gratitude, I want to look at the future with more optimism and more hope. and I am doing bold things. If I really take a step back and look at the things I've chosen to do, they are bold. I mean, being a coach is a bold move, right? Just being your own businesswoman is a bold move. So I need to give myself permission to also validate the opportunities where I have been doing risky things and appreciate that more. And so life is not always or has to be about hardships or lack of trusting others. There's a place I can have where I want to be more open to trusting others, allowing people to help me, because my dreams are not dreams I can do by myself. I do need others to help me get to my next dream, and I'm okay with that. And so yeah, so my thoughts are here is just to be more forward looking and appreciate and also recognize the moments where I have been courageous more. Because when I think about it, it's actually not as evenly on the not risk taker side. I'm actually pretty balanced in my pursuit of risk taking and not risk taking. I need to validate the things I'm doing as well, and not just thinking, oh, I'm not a risk taker, because that's such a black and white experience. There's days when I am feeling bold and courageous, and I need to have gratitude for that.
Yeah, I love that concept of gratitude, and I just want to take a moment and celebrate you as well for your courage and being courageous, because you're right. Like, doing this live is a courageous thing to do, right? Especially if you come from a history and lived experience of not really putting yourself out there too much, and it's dangerous to do that. So yeah, that's amazing, Jen. Thank you for role modeling and being an example of how we can be different, no matter how, what we learned to be before. Mm-hmm.
Can my parents listen to this? I'm kind of afraid, right? Because one of the heritage or cultural upbringing messaging is like shame is a big part of our upbringing. So talking about the ugly, all those things behind the external facade of a great job and a great go to college is all the ugliness that's behind the veil. That's hidden in that can be a lot of shame and judgment. And my parents worked so hard for that exterior view of like our house is, we worked hard for what we earned and we're a happy household. So I think there's still a lot of shame that needs to be flipped a little bit. So yeah, I mean, is this even me just opening up, like you said, is courageous, because this is not a topic my parents or family discuss around the table today. So this is a big deal, what I'm sharing to a lot. So thank you for giving me the courage and confidence to do that, Rosie. It was your idea to do this with you, so I'm so glad that I'm able to do that.
I'm just holding that for a minute, because I think the shame part is huge, and shame is an impact of trauma, whether we realize or recognize what those traumatic experiences were or not. And I'm saying trauma intentionally because that's also one of the things that gets swept under the rug, right? It took how long to even start having conversations about mental health? And even then we're saying health, not illness. So I'm saying trauma repeatedly to try to normalize it and de-shame it, particularly if you come from a heritage that is like, oh, that doesn't happen in our family, right? No, we don't. What do you mean trauma? That's not something that affects us. So I'm glad that you are naming shame, because we need to. I also just want to pause before we move on too quickly, because these stories and reflections we've been sharing, they may bring up stuff for you. I'm wondering if there's any questions that people have. If you don't have questions, that's totally fine. We are going to talk about some tips for how we can unlearn some of the things that we have been learning and internalized, as well as how we deal with the shame going forward. So if that's something that's come up for you around family shame or shame at work, please drop a note in the comments, let us know.